In October 401 BC, a soldier named Mithridates paid the highest price for telling a simple truth. The Persians called his punishment Scaphism, two flat wooden shells clamped over his body like a lid on a box. His arms and legs stuck out, his mouth held open. Every day the guards poured milk, mixed with honey, down his throat. The sweet drink made him sick. His own waste pooled under him, turning the tiny space into a rotting stew. Desert heat cooked the wood. Flies laid eggs. Maggots hatched. They ate his flesh while he was still alive, fed enough to stay breathing, trapped enough to do nothing but suffer. And believe it or not, this was only the warm-up. A modern mortician once said, "Stack every cruel death together. Scaphism still wins." Keep that thought as we step back 2,400 years to a dusty battlefield where one man's honesty ruined an emperor's story. Mithridates was born in western Persia. His family owned some land, but they were nowhere near the royal circle. As a boy, he learned to ride hard and throw a short spear from a galloping horse. Those two skills won him a place in the king's cavalry. But the boy with the spear was about to aim at destiny's heart. Persia and Greece had fought for years, but the real fight now was inside Persia. When the brothers Artaxerxes II and Cyrus the Younger met in battle at Cunaxa, 401 BC, with huge armies, Mithridates rode with the royal army. Cyrus hired 10,000 tough Greek mercenaries. Artaxerxes commanded the rest of the empire. In the clash, Mithridates' single spear flew across the field and struck Cyrus under the eye. He fell, bleeding, into the dust. One throw won a war, but one lie started a longer battle. After the battle, Artaxerxes gave him gold, fancy robes, and a seat at court. The king even gripped Mithridates' arm in front of everyone in a public thank you. But the king soon felt uneasy. If a common soldier had killed the rebel prince, people might say the king himself was weak. So Artaxerxes spread a safer story, that he had killed Cyrus in single combat. Scribes wrote it, priests repeated it. But Mithridates knew the tale was false. If he stayed quiet, there was no problem. Months later, at a victory banquet with too much wine, Mithridates bragged, after he heard a noble brag, how the king brought Cyrus down with one stroke. "Your king, it was my spear that found the prince's flesh." The king's face stiffened. In an ancient court, shaming the ruler was equal to treason. By sunrise, the order was public. Scaphism. They carried Mithridates to the river at sunrise. 2 half-boats of smooth cedar lay waiting, each carved like the inside of a shallow bowl. The guards lowered him into the bottom piece, tied his wrists and ankles so he could not shift even an inch. Then they set the second half over him. Only his head, hands and feet poked through narrow gaps. Now he was a man inside a wooden seed, ready to sprout misery. Before pushing the shell into the still backwater, the jailers spooned warm milk mixed with thick honey into his mouth. The sweet liquid seemed almost gentle, but it was the first stroke of the torture. More milk and honey were rubbed over his face, arms and legs, until he glistened in the sun like fresh syrup. The guards wanted every fly in Mesopotamia to smell the feast. Hours passed. The day grew hot. Milk soured in his stomach, and he threw it up. But there was nowhere for the vomit to flow, except back onto his chest and the wood beneath him. His body tried to fight the sticky heat by sweating, yet the sweat only mingled with the sweet coating. When the sun set, the shell still trapped the day's warmth, turning the coffin into an oven that baked him through the night. By the second dawn, insects arrived in the clouds. Flies landed first, tasting the honeyed skin. Soon they laid eggs in his eyes, ears, and the folds between his fingers. Before midday, those eggs hatched into tiny white grubs that burrowed into the smallest cuts. Each bite felt like a spark of fire, but he could not brush anything away. His own waste pooled beneath his back, soaking the timber, drawing even more hungry life. Day 4, and the torture still hadn't shown its worst card. Beetles soon nibbled the soft flesh of his feet. Wasps sipped the sweat on his temples. His belly cramped because the guards kept pouring milk and honey into him twice a day, enough to stop him from dying of thirst, never enough to let him rest. The sweetness slid through him, and every new bout of sickness made the smell around the coffin thicken until it hung in the air like a rotten curtain. After a week he could no longer tell one sunrise from the next. Fever burned his thoughts into bright confetti. Blisters opened where the wood rubbed his skin. Maggots moved in and out of those wounds like grains of rice in boiling water. Each breath rattled against swelling in his throat. A man's voice still answered when the guards mocked him, but the words came out slow and broken, as if spoken through mud. By the 10th day his body fought on two fronts. Outside, insects stripped away skin. Inside, unseen bacteria flooded his blood. Sometimes he shook so hard, the whole shell rocked on the water. Other moments he drifted by the reeds in mute silence, eyes crusted shut, listening to flies and distant frogs, while the sun hammered his skull. 17 mornings after the torture began, the river's surface lay calm around the cedar shell. No more rattling breaths came from inside. When the soldiers pried the halves apart, the stench rolled out first, then a sight that made even the hard-eyed veterans look away. Maggots writhed across what remained, and bones showed through patches where flesh had melted. The man who once rode with kings was now little more than a shadow filled with living worms. They slid the ruined shell back into the water and let it drift downstream, a silent warning to every watcher on the bank. Speak the king's truth, not your own. Mithridates' torment was finished, but the story of his death was just beginning. Centuries have passed since the river swallowed Mithridates, yet his story keeps crawling back into the light, much like the insects that once ate him. 3 men carried the tale across time: Chasius, Plutarch, and Zonaras. Chasius was a Greek doctor who served in Artaxerxes' court. He heard whispers in palace corridors and wrote them down. Plutarch, living 500 years later, loved stories that taught moral lessons, heroes, villains, hard-earned wisdom. Zonaras, a Byzantine monk writing 1,000 years after the event, copied chunks from both and filled the gaps as best he could. Notice what is missing: no clay tablet from the Persian royal archive, no court decree stamped with the king's seal, no inscription carved into stone. Persia spoke in silence, and silence can hide either shame or simple forgetfulness. That silence forces later writers to lean on Greek words. Even the name Scaphism comes from the Greek scapha, meaning trough or boat. Did the Greeks label a Persian torture with their own tongue, or invent the whole thing to paint the empire as monsters? Look around the ancient world, and cruelty was never in short supply. The Greeks pressed rebels into hollow logs and sawed them in two. Rome bricked Vestal virgins alive when they broke their vow. Far to the east, Chinese courts practiced ling chi, the slow carving of flesh. Different lands, same idea: fear is stronger when the victim stays awake. So Scaphism does not stand alone. It fits a grim family of punishments meant to break bodies and bend minds. But if wooden shells rotted away and river mud swallowed every nail, how can we ever be sure? Archaeologists dig along old river banks and find pottery shards, fish hooks, even wilted reed mats, but never a cedar coffin built for flies. Wood breaks, water carries, time forgets. A single line scratched on a clay prism, "Thus died Mithridates," would settle the matter, yet none has surfaced. Until one does, we weigh memories against each other like merchants weighing grain. Some scholars call the tale literal truth, a king's pride, a soldier's boast, and a punishment too perfect to invent. Others say it is an exaggerated morality story, a real execution pushed to extremes by storytellers who hungered for shock. A third, harsher camp labels it pure fiction, spun by Greek writers, eager to smear their old enemy after the Persian Wars. Here is the choice that sits before us, even now. If Scaphism truly happened, Mithridates stands as a warning that honesty can sink a man deeper than any lie. If it never happened, the myth itself still works, turning fear into a living tool, long after the king who ordered it turned to dust. Whichever verdict you hold, the lesson cuts the same: power hates embarrassment more than it hates crime, and stories, true or not, are sharper than spears at keeping that power in line.